So I bit the bullet and I bought these raw vintage Tremolo springs for my Stratocaster. I had a little bit of money left over for Christmas, so I thought, why not? Now I paid about $21.50, I believe, for these, including shipping, and I got them from, I think, Reverb.com. I'll double check on that and I'll put the information below. So what's the point of these? Why would it cost so much? Should it cost that much? I don't really think so. It probably costs like $5 to make these, but it is what it is. If they work and it helps your tone, then maybe it's worth it. We're gonna see. So what's the selling point for these? Well, it says right here on the back that the problem is most tremolo springs manufactured today are hard with strong tension and are 0.8 millimeters thinner than vintage springs. So we're gonna get to that. This not only affects the tone, but the feel as well. The solution when using raw vintage tremolo springs in sets of 4 or 5. The change in weight and tension provides superb torque, feel, and stability, creating fatter tone and thicker reverb. That's quite a promise. So when I first looked at these and then I pulled out a Fender spring, this is the spring from the Tremolo assembly, or the Trem assembly, that is currently on my Stratocaster. Now it goes by a few different names. I'll put that in the description below, or I'll put it on the screen here. It's like the American Vintage or the 62 Vintage Tremolo. Anyway, so this is one of the springs from that assembly. And when I first compared these visually, I was like, wow, this is the exact same thing. What a ripoff, right? Now I thought maybe the tension would be different. So what did I do? I pulled one out, and I'm gonna do that now. And we're gonna go in for a close-up and show you the differences. But before I do that, let's think about this, right? So I will tell you that these are a little bit larger in diameter. So I've seen some videos on YouTube where people are sort of comparing the sounds of these things, which to me the biggest thing is going to be feel. Not the biggest thing, but one of the biggest things is going to be feel, and the other one is less maybe tone and more sustain. So let's think about this logically, right? These are a little bigger in diameter than these. They're the same length, right? So that means that there's more material on these. Now, I don't know the density of the two materials. I don't have the instrumentation to figure that out, or the properties of these metals to know. This one could be denser. But the idea of these is, like I said, like I read off of here, where you would use maybe 3 of these Fender springs, you could use 4 or 5 of these raw vintage springs. So what does that do? It gives you more mass, right? And more mass scientifically equals more sustain. So, your strings are connected to the bridge, the saddles. The saddles are connected to the bridge plate. The bridge plate is connected to the bridge block, or the tremolo block.
Shin bone connected to the knee bone. That means the tibia connects to the patella.
And then the block is connected to the springs, and the springs are connected to the claw.
Knee bone connected to the thigh bone. That means the patella connects to the femur.
The claw is connected to the body, which the bridge plate is too, so it all works together. But the idea is more mass. So let me say again, these are different diameters, right? And so you would have to have more material in this spring to equal the same length as this one. And even if this was more dense, then if you use more of these springs, I would still say that you're more than likely getting more mass when you would use 4 or 5 of these springs versus 3 of these springs. I don't think the density of this is going to make that much of a difference. And these are also springier. In other words, there's less tension when you pull on the ends. And again, I'm going to go in for a close-up and show you more about that. Okay, so here we are, the raw vintage springs, and I've got the Fender one. Now I would say this is typical of most Fender. I can't say for sure, but again, I got it out of the one that I have. It's an American Fender vintage, whatever you want to call it, typical assembly. So I would call this a typical Fender spring. So let's open these bad guys up. So right off the bat, I don't know if you can tell, on the left is the raw vintage spring, and on the right is the Fender one. You can visibly see the difference in the diameter. Again, on the left is raw vintage, on the right is Fender. So now let's take the measurements of these guys. I don't have the best calipers, but this is the Fender, and it's about 8 millimeters. Okay, 8 millimeters. Now the raw vintage is, like they say, is about 0.8 millimeters larger in diameter. So how do they feel stiffness wise? Well, that's going to be very hard to translate on the screen, but this is sort of the strength it takes to pull apart the Fender one, and this is the raw vintage one. It's much easier, it gives more. Again, so this is raw vintage, and this is Fender. Now, you can't see the amount of effort I'm exerting, but it's definitely more effort to pull apart this one than it is the raw vintage. So that's a close-up. That's a comparison of the diameter and as best I can, translate the amount of give that one has over the other. You can even see right there that the raw vintage one is visibly a little larger in diameter. So now the goal for me is to take these 3 Fender springs off and replace them with the raw vintage springs. Now I thought seriously about doing a sound comparison, but there's quite a lot of videos on YouTube actually doing that or attempting to do that. My other thought was that it's going to be really hard to tell the difference unless you do it under really a controlled environment. And I don't have the best recording studio setup, if you will. So I thought it was kind of pointless to try to get a sound comparison. Again, I'm looking sort of for feel and for sustain, and if there's an added amount of, or there's an added benefit with the tone and maybe the reverb, which you're not going to really hear when it's plugged in, you know, then so be it. Again, those are the things I'm looking for. So it's probably going to be really hard to tell if there's a sound difference. So I'm not even going to attempt it. Now I did want to say with my Strat, in particular, the setup that I have is essentially a decked bridge plate. It's not blocked, so there's no block here between the block itself and the body, but it is decked, and so there's just enough tension on the springs as it is now to hold that in place, but I still have the ability to use the whammy bar or the trim bar like so. That's how I set my Strats up, and so I'm going to do the same thing with the raw vintage springs. Alright, what the hey, I'll give you a little bit of a sound comparison. I've just got the guitar propped up. This is not at all a controlled experiment, but I'm just going to strum the open strings. So that's the sound you're hearing from my camera and from the back of the guitar. So that's the action of the springs. So we'll see if you can hear any difference with the raw vintage springs. Okay, I got the springs on, so my guitar is roughly in the same spot as it was. Like I said, this isn't very scientifically controlled, but here's the open sound. And here's the action. So I've got this on a chair. That's the wobbling you hear is the chair. I will say it is a little stiffer with 5 on there. I did have to back out the claw a little bit because the way I have mine set again is the strings just barely, well, not even lifting up the bridge. So essentially the springs are just enough to make the bridge decked with the tension of the strings, right? So it may feel a little stiffer as far as, like I said, when using the trim. But as far as sound, I don't know. You know, I'll have to have some time with it. Can't really hear a huge difference. Sustain, I do feel like I may be drinking the Kool-Aid, but I do feel like there's a little bit more sustain. The notes last a little longer. I will say that because of the diameter of these springs with my Strat, that I don't know if you can see down this plane, but they do, I feel, stick out slightly a little bit, like outside of the body. So I would not probably be able to have a spring cavity cover on here. If you watch my video about installing the cover, I made sure, and there's only a little tiny bit of gap between the springs themselves and the plate, but there was some clearance. Now with these springs, I don't think I would have that. They would probably be touching, and that, you know, may inhibit the acoustic sound, maybe the plugged in sound. I don't know. You'd have some sound, I guess, being transferred to the plastic, and that would be interfering with it translating to the body maybe. Who knows? Who is to say? But I do have 5 springs now. Now John Mayer has 5 springs. I don't know if he ever really uses his whammy bar or tremolo bar. I've not really ever seen him do that, except maybe on like, whatever that album that Assassin's on. There's a song, I think the opening song on that album, he does a thing with the whammy bar. That's about the only thing I've seen him really do. But unashamedly, John Mayer's a guitar hero of mine. Whether you like his personal character or not is to be debated. Of course, I'm not saying either way, but guitar-wise, he's, I guess, you know, like a lot of people, I aspire to kind of achieve that tone and playability. So if he's got 5 springs, then it's probably good enough for me, and I think I'm going to leave this like it is. So just for comparison's sake, and for you to see the difference in the tension and the diameter and maybe the feel, I just wanted to let you know my experience with these, and hope it helps in some way for you to make up your mind if maybe you would like to purchase these or invest in these. So again, hope it helps. Thanks as always for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next video.